Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take a stack of your sources, articles, research, our own notes, and, well, we try to extract the most important nuggets of knowledge, helping you get truly well-informed fast. Today, we're embarking on a journey to uncover something really foundational, something we often take for granted. We frequently talk about Western thought as if it just, well, appeared, like a natural evolution.
Yeah.
But its true origins, the actual bedrock of how we reason, how we question, how we seek truth, it's a story of these extraordinary intellectual leaps. It's kind of an unsung revolution in how humanity began to think about the world and their place in it.
Indeed. What's truly striking here, and what our sources consistently highlight, is that the rise of Greek civilization wasn't just another empire popping up or, a slow, gradual progression from what came before.
Right.
It was, the sources call it a sudden rise of just unparalleled intellectual development, especially when you compare it to the really advanced societies that had been thriving for thousands of years before the Greeks even really stepped onto the world stage.
Yeah, cultures with huge achievements, pyramids, intricate law codes.
Yep. Monumental achievement.
So, okay, let's unpack this a bit. Why do we focus so much on Greece when we talk about the origins of our way of thinking? What exactly made Greek civilization so exceptional compared to, say, the really formidable societies of Egypt and Mesopotamia? I mean, we're talking about civilizations that developed complex writing, advanced maths, sophisticated governance systems like millennia before the first Greek philosophers started challenging things.
And that is precisely our deep dive mission today. We're sifting through a really fascinating collection of sources that explore the very beginnings of what we now call Western philosophy, and maybe more broadly, the unique context that allowed Greek civilization to flourish in such a distinct and transformative way.
Okay, so our mission is to understand how the Greeks managed to move beyond, inherited orthodoxy and purely mystical thought, how they developed mathematics, science, philosophy in a way that profoundly shaped our modern world.
That's it. We'll be extracting those crucial differences, those unexpected turns, and hopefully those genuine aha moments that set them apart, and ultimately set us on a new intellectual trajectory.
And this isn't just ancient history for you, our listener. This exploration of ancient Greece isn't just like an academic exercise.
Not at all.
This is the bedrock of how you think, how you question, and how you seek knowledge today. It's about understanding the very foundations of rational inquiry, that spirit of critical thought that, well, continues to drive discovery. So let's begin by setting the stage. Let's contrast nascent Greece with the established giants of its time, Egypt and Mesopotamia. Our sources repeatedly tell us that what the Greeks achieved in art, literature, and the intellectual realm was exceptional. That's a strong word, isn't it? Especially when you think about the huge achievements of their predecessors. I mentioned the Great Pyramid, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
It is a strong word. And a truly compelling aspect here is the type of intellectual achievement that marks this distinction. So while Egypt and Mesopotamia certainly excelled in practical mathematics and science.
Oh, yeah. Building pyramids, managing agriculture.
Right, exactly. The precision needed for aligning pyramids with stars, or the complex calculations for managing huge agricultural systems, or even, the Babylonians' advanced astronomical predictions.
Yeah.
The Greeks were really the first to consistently write about the nature of the world and the ends of human life without being rigidly bound by that inherited dogma.
Right.
This speculative, deductive reasoning. That was a truly Greek innovation, a fundamental departure from what came before.
It sounds like maybe a subtle difference, what versus how, but that must have been a seismic shift in human thinking.
Oh, huge.
I mean, imagine living in a world where answers always came from, divine pronouncements, ancient myths, inherited rituals, and then suddenly you have a philosopher like Thales. Instead of just accepting myths about gods controlling the weather, he starts observing patterns, measuring shadows, theorizing that water is the fundamental element behind everything.
Yeah.
That wasn't just idle curiosity, was it? It feels like the birth of systematic, abstract inquiry, asking those big why questions that looked for rational, universal principles beyond just the immediate practical stuff.
Precisely. And this shift towards rational inquiry was profound. But how did these radical new ideas actually spread? How did they gain traction?
Good question.
The answer, surprisingly, takes us back to a seemingly simple yet utterly transformative technology: writing, specifically the Greek innovation within writing.
Okay.
So writing was invented in Egypt way back, maybe 4000 BC, and in Mesopotamia a bit later, around 3500, 3000 BC.
Right, starting with pictures, basically. Pictograms.
Exactly, pictograms, symbols directly representing an object. These then became conventionalized, evolving into ideograms, symbols representing ideas or concepts.
Big in China, right? Thousands of cents.
Exactly. The sources note China developed this cumbrous system of thousands of ideograms over millennia. It was a long, complex process to master. You needed specialized scribes.
Okay, so where do the Greeks fit in? How did they change things?
Well, this is where they made a crucial intervention. They borrowed the Phoenician alphabet.
Right, from traders, presumably.
Which was consonantal, meaning it only represented consonants. No vowels written down.
Sure.
But the Greeks made a simple yet profound modification. They added vowels. Our sources call this the most important innovation in the history of writing.
Wow. Adding vowels, it sounds so basic.
It does, but think about it. Suddenly you have a system where pretty much every sound in the language could be easily represented. It just became significantly easier to learn, to read, and to write.
So it wasn't just for priests or scribes anymore.
Exactly. This ease of writing had profound implications for spreading knowledge. Imagine the difference for you trying to decipher and memorize thousands of complex ideograms versus learning a straightforward phonetic alphabet. Maybe, 24 letters?
Yeah, much easier.
This accessibility allowed ideas to circulate much more freely, to be debated, critiqued, and to evolve at a pace that was just unprecedented. It sort of democratized knowledge in a way that hadn't happened before, moving intellectual discourse out of, the sole domain of priestly scribes and into the public square, the agora.
So that raises the question, how much did that contribute to their intellectual explosion? That easier writing system?
It's hard to put a number on it, obviously, but its impact on literacy, even if literacy wasn't universal, and just the sharing of complex ideas must have been immense. Really crucial.
Okay, and then there's geography. That always plays a huge role, often overlooked maybe.
Absolutely.
Egypt and Mesopotamia, they thrived on these incredibly fertile river valleys, the Nile, the Tigris, the Euphrates. This abundance led to super productive agriculture.
Supporting large populations.
Right, large centralized populations, and as a result, these vast unified empires with strong central authorities. You get these massive coherent states emerging because the land could support it.
Exactly. Perfect conditions for centralization. But Greece, completely different landscape.
Yeah, mountains everywhere.
Ruggedly mountainous, largely infertile, lots of small, isolated valleys, and this huge coastline, all jagged.
So harder to unify.
Much harder. This geographical reality meant it was far more difficult to form large, unified empires. Instead, it naturally led to the development of small, independent city-states, the polis.
Right, like Athens, Sparta, Corinth.
Each with its own character, its own governance, often fiercely independent. This fostered a much more diverse political landscape and, well, out of necessity, a reliance on the sea for commerce and communication between these scattered communities.
So they were constantly trading. And sometimes, let's be honest, the sources mention piracy too.
Oh, yes, piracy was definitely part of the mix.
This decentralization, this constant interaction, maybe competition between different city-states, each trying out different social and political experiments. That must have encouraged a certain intellectual dynamism, wouldn't you say?
I think so.
Though fragmentation could just lead to constant fighting, couldn't it? How did they manage to leverage that fragmentation for dynamism rather than just perpetual warfare?
That's a really perceptive question, and conflict was certainly a recurring theme, no doubt about it. But the very nature of these independent city-states meant that no single power could completely dominate intellectual discourse or enforce a rigid orthodoxy across the whole region.
Ah, I see. Unlike in Egypt, maybe.
Exactly, unlike the monolithic empires where dissent could be, well, swiftly crushed. In Greece, a philosopher or an artist could potentially just pack up and move to a more receptive city-state if their ideas weren't welcome where they were.
The kind of marketplace of ideas.
Precisely. Fostered by that constant interaction and competition, it created an environment where different perspectives could emerge, be debated, evolve. It wasn't uniform at all. It was this tapestry of diverse approaches, which, maybe ironically, led to a richer overall intellectual output.
Okay, now if we look back even further, before the classical Greeks, we see these clear echoes of past civilizations influencing them.
Definitely.
And ancient civilizations pretty much everywhere, right? Egypt, Mesopotamia, even the Inca in Peru, or the Maya in Mexico. Kings were often seen as divine, or at least having a special pipeline to the gods.
Absolute power.
Yeah, encompassing military, aristocratic, and priestly authority. Their word was basically law, straight from the heavens.
Absolutely. The divine right of kings was pervasive, a foundational pillar of governance. And this wasn't just theoretical power either.
How so?
Well, the king's authority was often reinforced by how difficult their religious cults were. You needed specialized priests to interpret complex rituals, complex texts, that centralized spiritual control. Or it was reinforced by just the pervasive fear among serfs, who were tied to the land and basically their ruler's property. In Egypt, for instance, the pharaoh literally owned all the land. He embodied the state, the religion, the economy, all in one divine figure.
Which is just a world away from later Greek ideas about citizenship and public debate.
A world away. It really stands in stark contrast to the later Greek developments, where power structures started to fragment, started to be debated, questioned, allowing space for public discourse.
That focus on individual choice and questioning really does sound like a foundational shift. And this deep link between religion and royalty, it also shaped beliefs about the afterlife, right?
Profoundly. Egyptians, for example, were hugely preoccupied with the afterlife.
Mummification, the pyramids.
Exactly. They believed the soul would eventually return to the body, so the body had to be preserved. This explains their elaborate tombs, those massive pyramids, the meticulous mummification process, all designed to ensure a successful journey to and continuity in the afterlife. Their focus was very much on extending life beyond death.
But not everyone was like that. You mentioned the Babylonians.
Right. Babylonian theology, interestingly, was notably less concerned with the afterlife. They focused more on this life, the immediate world, on fate and omens, rather than, say, individual salvation or a detailed map of the next world.
So does that difference matter? Did the Greeks' focus maybe shift because they weren't as obsessed with the afterlife as the Egyptians?
It's a really interesting thought. The focus on the afterlife in Egypt wasn't just a belief. It manifested in immense societal investment. Think of the pharaoh as a divine conduit, the pyramids as these colossal gateways to eternity.
The Book of the Dead.
Right, thousands of elaborate spells all meticulously guiding the deceased. This directed vast intellectual and material resources towards preserving the soul for an existence beyond the material world.
So maybe when the Greeks started questioning the nature of the cosmos here and now, without that overwhelming focus on eternity,
It's possible. It might have freed up immense intellectual bandwidth for earthly philosophy, for considering the good life in this world, for intellectual inquiry not solely tied to ritual or the next existence. It's speculative, but plausible.
makes sense. And while the Greeks developed these unique traditions, they obviously didn't emerge in a vacuum. They were connected.
Absolutely, part of a larger ancient world.
You mentioned the Babylonians. They were incredibly advanced in astronomy, right?
Yeah.
Far beyond just simple observation.
Oh, yeah. They developed the 24-hour day, the 360-degree circle, and had remarkably accurate methods for predicting eclipses. That shows a really sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics.
And they also gave us the Code of Hammurabi.
One of the earliest and most complete written law codes we have, dating back to around 1754 BC. That predates a lot of Greek legal thought and certainly laid some groundwork for concepts of justice and accountability.
And then, much closer to Greece, geographically and culturally, you had Crete, the Minoan civilization.
Right, flourishing roughly between 2700 and 1450 BC. A major maritime power dominating trade in the Aegean, famous for those beautiful, vibrant palaces like Knossos.
With the frescoes and open courtyards.
Exactly. And our sources highlight that the Minoans worshipped a prominent goddess, often called the Master of Animals, often seen as a powerful mother goddess figure, which is quite a different religious focus from the male-dominated pantheons we usually associate with later Greece.
Interesting. Maybe a counterpoint to the later patriarchal traditions.
Perhaps. It suggests a different emphasis, at least.
And their art, too, the sources say it was very original and amazingly full of life, suggests a dynamic culture that valued aesthetics, maybe a more harmonious view of nature.
It certainly seems that way. Vibrant, dynamic.
So this raises the question, how much did these earlier sophisticated civilizations, especially the Minoans with their ships everywhere, influence the early Greeks? Through trade, cultural exchange, maybe religious ideas, art.
Oh, there was definitely influence. There had to be. There was a consistent flow of goods, people, ideas across the Mediterranean.
So the Minoans acted as a bridge, maybe.
I think that's a good way to put it. Their advanced culture, their trade networks, they definitely served as a bridge between the older Near Eastern civilizations and the emerging Greek world on the mainland. Their art, their architecture, you can see traces filtering into early Mycenaean culture. And elements of their religion might have influenced early Greek worship, too.
Right. It's a reminder that cultural development is rarely just isolated. It's always this mix.
It's a rich tapestry woven from diverse threads. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on from those ancient giants and their influences, let's get into the tumultuous birth of classical Greece itself. Because before what we think of as classical Greece, there was the Mycenaean civilization.
Flourishing roughly 1600 to 1100 BC Bronze Age culture.
Known for their powerful kings, these impressive fortresses on hilltops like Mycenae itself, with those massive cyclopean walls.
Walls so big, later Greeks thought only giants could have built them.
Exactly. And a clear culture of fierce warfare, right? Lots of weapons found, battle scenes in their art.
Yeah.
They definitely weren't just peace-loving philosophers back then. Their society seemed structured around military strength, centralized control.
That's right. And the Mycenaean civilization, which was already weakened by persistent internal fighting and maybe environmental issues, climate change perhaps,
Right.
it was eventually destroyed around 1100 BC by invaders known as the Dorians.
Okay, the Dorians. Who were they?
Our sources suggest the Dorians were, and this is a quote, probably the original Indo-European religion. They brought a new set of cultural practices, maybe a more austere way of life. They were among the ancestors of the Greeks themselves, but their arrival kind of plunged the region into what historians often call the Greek Dark Ages. Literacy declined, population dropped.
So the Greeks as we know them weren't just one continuous group.
No, not at all. They emerged from this complex blend of different peoples, the earlier Ionians and Achaeans who were part of the Mycenaean world, and then these Dorian invaders mixing in.
And this collision of cultures, this blending, seems to have created fertile ground for some really distinctive social and political experiments later on, didn't it?
Absolutely.
The sources state, and this is interesting, that the Dorians brought with them an aristocracy constituted of fair-haired invaders. That immediately suggests a social hierarchy based on conquest, right? A new ruling class imposing its will on the existing people.
Yes, that conquest element seems key. This blending of conquerors and conquered, of different traditions, it definitely laid the groundwork for the unique social dynamics and maybe the intellectual ferment we see later.
And one of the most distinctive, maybe extreme of these experiments was Sparta.
Ah, Sparta, yes.
Yeah.
Profoundly shaped by its Dorian heritage and that constant need to control a huge subject population.
Helots, right?
The Helots, exactly. Sparta developed this unique, highly militarized social system. A small aristocracy, these descendants of the Dorian invaders, dominated a much, much larger population of oppressed serfs, the Helots.
And their wealth came from.
Almost entirely from conquest and the systematic, often brutal exploitation of the Helots. The Helots farmed the land for them. They significantly outnumbered the Spartan citizens, which meant the Spartans lived in constant fear of revolt, requiring that intense military discipline and vigilance just to maintain control.
Which leads to this fascinating, stark contrast. Sparta, this highly disciplined, almost totalitarian military state, focused on stability, control, suppressing its own people, versus Athens, which, as we know, would later experiment with democracy.
The great counterpoint.
But even Athenian democracy, our sources are quick to clarify, it was government by all the citizens, sure, but...
Big asterisk there.
Yeah, huge asterisk. This didn't include women, who are half the population. It didn't include slaves, who are the backbone of their economy. And it didn't include the metics, the foreigners living and working in Athens.
Right. So citizenship was a highly exclusive privilege, far from universal suffrage as we understand it today.
So it forces us to ask that critical question. What does democracy truly mean, even in its earliest forms, when power and wealth are still so concentrated and citizenship is defined largely by who was left out?
Exactly. It wasn't about inherent human rights for everyone. It was about the rights of a specific, pretty narrow group of adult male citizens. This limited definition, it just reminds us that even these groundbreaking political innovations often have their own deeply embedded limitations, contradictions, which, frankly, were often not even questioned by those who benefited.
Okay. Now, shifting gears a bit, maybe one of the most significant forces shaping the early Greek mindset, something that just permeated their culture, was the legacy of Homer.
Oh, absolutely fundamental.
The Homeric poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey, probably composed around 750 BC. They weren't just epic stories. They were, in many ways, the foundational texts for Greek identity, right?
Yeah.
Shaping their values from, say, 750 to 550 BC and way beyond.
They were learned by heart, recited constantly. They served as moral compasses, cultural blueprints.
So what is so special about them?
Well, what's truly compelling is how Homer portrayed his characters. He presented them as distinct individuals, with unique personalities, complex motivations, internal struggles. Not just, simple types or archetypes representing some divine will or collective identity.
Like Achilles' rage or Odysseus' cleverness.
Exactly. Think of Achilles' searing rage and pride, or Odysseus' cunning intellect and his enduring loyalty. This profound emphasis on individual action, individual choice, individual consequence. That was a significant departure from earlier traditions, where human agency often got swallowed up by divine decree or the king's will or just the identity of the tribe. Homer showed that individual decisions had huge impact.
And Homeric virtue, it wasn't really about being pious in the way you might think or following some strict moral code from the gods.
Not really. The sources emphasized deeds over inherited orthodoxy. It was about greatness, about achievement, demonstrating prowess or edge straight, whether that was in battle or strategic cunning or being persuasive with words. The heroes were celebrated for their extraordinary capabilities, their pursuit of glory, kleos, in this life, not primarily for their devotion to a deity or obedience to commandments. It really put human excellence, human potential, right at the center.
And this focus on the human even extended to how they saw their gods.
Absolutely. The Olympian gods were, as the sources described them, remarkably human-like.
Flawed.
Very flawed, prone to vices, squabbles, petty jealousies, often acting on whims. They didn't always appear particularly religious in a traditional moralistic sense. People revered them, sure, performed rituals, offered sacrifices to keep them happy.
Right.
But they didn't necessarily derive their day-to-day morality or ethical beliefs directly from the gods' often capricious actions. I mean, Zeus, for all his power, was hardly a moral role model.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So the gods were part of the story, part of the world, explaining things like thunder or fate, but they weren't the ultimate moral compass dictating every action. If even the gods were flawed and acted like humans, then it seems like that frees up a lot of space for human agency, human responsibility, doesn't it?
I think it does.
It suggests that humans themselves had to figure things out, forge their own ethical codes, seek wisdom, rather than just waiting for divine instructions.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this humanization of the divine might have really contributed to that Greek focus on human potential, on human reason. The gods, with all their foibles and their grandeur, they sort of reflected humanity rather than strictly dictating to it from some unreachable perfect realm.
So it created a cultural space.
Yeah, a space where human inquiry, individual achievement, developing secular ethics, all that could flourish without constantly having to refer back to some unchallengeable divine will. It wasn't, abandoning the gods, but it was definitely a recentering of human experience alongside them.
But Greek thought wasn't all just rational heroes and these, very human gods and their ordered pantheons.
No, definitely not.
The sources also reveal a darker side, maybe more primitive, even chaotic. And then this fascinating quest for purity that seems to emerge from it. Let's talk about the cult of Dionysus, or Bacchus.
Oh, yes, Dionysus, a very different beast from the Olympians.
Radically different, it sounds like. Not the calm, ordered public worship of, say, Apollo or Athena. This involved wild revelry, intoxication, ecstatic dance, a deliberate loss of self-control.
What's fascinating here is that this cult represented a powerful, maybe primal aspect of human nature. The ecstatic, the uninhibited, a yearning for release from the burdens of consciousness, the rigid structures of civilization.
Release.
Yeah, the sources describe it as a kind of voluntary madness, a way to achieve release from the burdens of perception. It was about raw emotion, connecting to the wild, untamed forces within us and around us, a temporary dissolving of the individual self into this collective frenzy. Intoxication was key.
So while Homer gives us the rational hero, striving for greatness, self-mastery, Dionysus shows us the opposite, the chaotic, uninhibited human spirit, seeking dissolution in ecstatic, irrational experience.
It's like these two fundamental opposing forces, order and chaos, reason and emotion. The individual and the collective were both incredibly powerful in early Greek thought, vying for influence, for expression. Apollo and Dionysus, the classic tension.
And out of that Dionysian ferment, that wildness, something quite remarkable arose. a new spiritual movement offering a stark contrast. Orphism.
Yes, Orphism. Emerging as a new religion, it emphasized purification, discipline, a clear, systematic path to salvation. It offered a meticulously defined view of good and bad that went beyond just, societal norms. It promised a way out of the cycle of suffering inherent in existence.
So why did that gain traction, especially when, as you said, the traditional Olympian religion wasn't super moralistic or focused on personal salvation?
That's a great question. The Orphics introduced some really radical new concepts. A belief in reincarnation, for one, a cycle of birth and death, and this revolutionary idea that the soul, which they saw as divine pure, could be liberated from the body.
The body is a tomb. I think the sources mention that phrase.
Exactly. The body is a tomb, soma sema. The soul is trapped within it, undergoing punishment for some primordial sin, perhaps related to the myth of Dionysus being torn apart by the Titans.
Okay, so how do you get out? How do you achieve salvation?
Well, their goal was to achieve ecstasy, like the Dionysian rites, but a completely different kind, not through wine and frenzy, but through spiritual union with God. This was achieved through strict purification rituals, ascetic practices like vegetarianism, and the pursuit of knowledge.
So pursuit of purity.
Yeah.
A methodical way to escape the wheel of birth, as they called it.
Precisely, to escape that cycle and attain a happier, more divine destiny in the afterlife. It marked a really significant shift towards an internal, self-administered check on behavior, a focus on inner transformation, not just outward ritual performance.
And here's where it gets really interesting, really transformative maybe. Orphism influenced major philosophers who came later.
Hugely influential, particularly on Pythagoras, who famously embraced this life of rigorous discipline, mathematics as purification.
Right, the harmony of numbers.
And even more significantly, on Plato. Plato's ideas about the immortality of the soul, his whole theory of forms, the idea that true reality exists in this transcendent, perfect realm beyond our senses,
Okay.
and the importance of intellectual and moral discipline as the path to purifying the soul so it can apprehend those forms, all of that is deeply linked to Orphic beliefs. It really marks a significant move towards that internal spiritual journey, advocating for a reasoned, disciplined life to free the divine within.
Wow, so that idea, the body is a tomb, it provided this powerful new framework for understanding human existence and the whole point of knowledge, maybe.
Absolutely. It suggested that true understanding, real happiness, ultimate liberation, it came from freeing the soul from its earthly desires, its limitations, its bodily prison. The spiritual revolution, with its emphasis on individual salvation through self-control and intellectual pursuit, laid a crucial foundation for so much subsequent Greek philosophy, metaphysics, ethics, the nature of reality itself. It shifted the focus from placating external gods to nurturing the internal divine spark through human responsibility and potential.
Okay, so after exploring all these different facets, geography, writing, ancient influences, these internal tensions like Dionysus versus Orpheus, we come back to the core question. What is the enduring distinctiveness of Greek thought? What really sets it apart from everything that came before?
Well, I think the key thing is that shift away from inherited orthodoxy. Unlike earlier civilizations that were heavily reliant on what was known through tradition or mystical interpretations handed down by divine authority,
Right.
the Greeks really started to ask why and how in a rational, systematic way. They weren't just observing, they were interrogating, speculating, building logical arguments.
It's that critical shift from mythos to logos, from story to reason.
Exactly. Their philosophy literally began with figures like Thales, who, as the sources mention, didn't just passively watch the stars. He actively speculated about the underlying principles of the cosmos, famously predicting an eclipse through rational observation, not divine revelation.
Yeah.
They were moving from simply describing what was to questioning what could be, seeking universal underlying principles, explanations that didn't rely solely on the gods or ancient custom. It was a genuine spirit of intellectual inquiry for its own sake, driven by curiosity, not just practical need.
It was that joy of discovery, maybe.
Yeah.
That love of learning philosophy, literally meaning love of wisdom, that became central to their intellectual output, not just practical application. They weren't just building better irrigation or more precise calendars, though they did that too and were good at it. They were exploring ideas, the nature of justice, the ideal state, what the universe is made of, because these questions were inherently fascinating, crucial for understanding existence itself. This intellectual freedom, this pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, that really feels unique.
I agree, and this spirit of inquiry was deeply human-centric. The Greeks, in their art, their literature, their philosophy, they consistently put humanity at the center of their universe, in a way.
Oh, so.
Well, their gods were human-like, as we discussed. Their heroes celebrated individual virtue, individual achievement, and their philosophical inquiries so often focused on human reason, human ethics, the human condition.
Right, from Sophocles' tragedies looking at human suffering to Plato's dialogues grappling with human morality.
Exactly. The human experience was the primary lens through which they tried to understand the world.
So this emphasis on the individual, the power of human reason, the belief that through critical thought and debate we can actually uncover truth, that's arguably their most enduring legacy.
I think it has to be. They didn't just inherit knowledge, they critiqued it, debated it, systematically built upon it. They laid the groundwork for scientific methodology, for philosophical inquiry as we know it.
Paving the way for critical thinking, questioning assumptions, seeking multiple perspectives, stuff that you, our listener, do every day when you seek out information, analyze it, form your own conclusions.
They really ignited a spark that, well, continues to illuminate our intellectual landscape today.
So, wrapping up, we've seen how Greek civilization, despite, challenging geography, a tumultuous history of invasions, cultural clashes, somehow managed to foster this unprecedented intellectual boom.
Yeah.
From cleverly adapting writing to asking fundamental questions about the nature of existence and humanity's role, they really set the stage for Western thought, moving beyond just practicalities into profound philosophical speculation, leaving this enduring legacy of rational inquiry.
And the distinction, I think, lies profoundly in that pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, that growing emphasis on the individual's capacity for agency, for reason, and their unique capacity for critical, rational inquiry. They evolved significantly beyond the purely mystical or the inherited orthodoxies of earlier civilizations. They dared to ask questions that maybe hadn't been asked before or hadn't been asked in that way, seeking answers not just in divine pronouncements, but in human logic, in observation, in argument.
Okay, so what does this all mean for you today? Here's something to think about. Considering that tension we explored between the wild, ecstatic Dionysian cults, all about uninhibited expression, losing the self, and the disciplined, soul-searching Orphic tradition emphasizing purification, spiritual purity. What ancient echoes of that tension do you see in modern society? And our constant balancing act between, say, uninhibited expression and the pursuit of self-improvement, discipline, maybe even spiritual purity.
Are we always swinging between those poles or trying to find some kind of synthesis? And this raises another important question, maybe. Does our modern information overload, where we're just constantly bombarded with facts, opinions, noise, does it make us more like the Greeks, constantly seeking to distill knowledge, ask those penetrating questions, engage in rational inquiry to find meaning?
Whoa.
Or perhaps does it make us more prone to just accepting inherited orthodoxies, uncritically accepting information without questioning it, simply because there's so much to process, it's just easier to lean on received wisdom, whatever pops up first on our feed?
Something for you to definitely mull over long after this deep dive ends.